Texas, you just don't throw a brat on the grill. As the #1 premium smoked sausage in Texas, we know what Texans like on their table. I'm Mike Kilbasa. Give us a try, and you'll understand why we're the best in the business.
Good evening. Welcome to Catholicism Live. I'm Alan Becker, and I'm happy to be here to be your host tonight. This is Theology of the Body, episode number 8 out of the 8 episodes we've been doing this last fall. If you've listened to us before, thank you and welcome back to our CTSA listeners in Channel 15, KJMA 89.7 FM. If you are first-time listeners, don't worry. If you missed the last 7 episodes, we'll catch you up and we'll thread through some of those things through tonight also. We also are thank you for the people on grnonline.com. So if you're outside the San Antonio area, or if you are listening here and you want others outside San Antonio area to hear this program, please tell them, get on the web, www.grnonline, go under the programming under South Texas, and we're streaming through KJMA 89.7 FM. We want to thank our friends at KJMA for doing that for us. This is hosted by the Pilgrim Center of Hope, and our guest tonight is Dr. David Delaney again, the Academic Dean of the Mexican American Catholic College. Dr. Delaney, thank you.
Well, thank you, Alan, as well.
Great to have you here. We will hear everything that Dr. Delaney has to say on this topic. We've been talking about Theology of the Body, John Paul II's famous work, and we want to get more and more out and more in depth. And we took this episodes and took it to the culture. The culture out there, the sex culture, the distorted culture, the different topics. And if you've been following us, we talked about free fall, why marriages are falling apart, pornography, how we can see and how that hurt families and marriages and how we can do about that. A knot that cannot be tied. We talked about the so-called, quote-unquote, homosexual marriage, where it cannot be a marriage as God created us. And tonight, the culture of death. Again, as we've done other episodes, Dr. Delaney, let's start with a definition. What do we mean by the culture of death?
Yes, thanks, Alan. Yeah, the culture of death is actually a term that John Paul II coined. The best I can tell, he first used it back in 1993 at the World Youth Day back in Denver when it was here, and he used the term in that this homily that he gave on the Feast of the Assumption. That essentially looked at, he used it in reference. The reading for that day was was from Revelation 12, and this cosmic battle, if you remember, between the woman, the Mary, and the church, who she symbolized, as well as and Satan. And so he sees what's happening today as this same kind of cosmic battle, the culture of life versus the culture of death. Later in Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, which came out 2 years later in 1995, he uses the term now 12 times. Oh. And here he's talking about this culture of life versus this culture of death, and he refers to the culture of death as this kind of mentality in which that human beings have succumbed to, in which we are no longer willing to look at life from the perspective of of its real meaning, its authentic meaning as authentic human persons, and so the two things that are seen is the maximizing pleasure, and these two goals, it seems, of life, right, of this culture of death are maximizing pleasure and minimizing or eliminating suffering or pain, and so because these are the main goals of life. Anything is worth achieving them, because in this culture of death, relativism, as Benedict XVI has referred to, he calls this this relativism, or the tyranny, if you will,
Right,
or
the
dictatorship.
The dictatorship of relativism. Just to
yes.
catch up a little bit, David, you got a whole bunch to cover tonight.
Right.
But we're going to chapter 12, verses 1 through 8, and we talk about the woman appeared in the sky. Of course, Mary with the 12 stars and the moon under her feet, and we have the huge dragon. And that's what we were talking about. So look in chapter 12 of Revelation, verses about 1 through 8 there. Of course, Mary being the culture of life, life bringing the Son of God, of which we will celebrate here in a couple days as Christmas, being the ultimate life, and the dragon, the ultimate death. And our society today has those two dichotomies. We have people who, we need to be a people of life, but yet we have people that have lost the sense of life, have become kind of culture of death, maybe without knowing it, maybe insidious.
It is, Alan. It really is. And there are two underlying themes associated with this that John Paul points out to in the Gospel of Life. One is this disordered sense of freedom, in which anything goes. With regard, freedom is and becomes in itself an end which is tightly associated usually with pursuing pleasure or avoiding pain, but it almost is an end in itself, and oftentimes the pro-choice culture treats it that way. It's a choice. Ultimately it's about choice, and that's very seductive for us.
Sure.
But there's this other aspect of it that he says is even more fundamental, and he says that this is the loss of the sense of God. Because when we lose the idea of God, we lose the idea of who we are as human beings, as human persons, and eventually we end up turning against ourselves. There's a reason for this idea of this contraceptive mentality, which I think in many ways underlies, the contraceptive mentality actually underlies the abortive mentality. It underlies this mentality towards euthanasia. And I think it all goes back to what sin originated from. We can go back all the way to Satan.
Sure. So what you're saying, the culture of death, just to put a little kind of perspective on it, starts at conception, or trying to avoid conception, or that conception that happens never sticks to inside the womb. We'll talk about that a little more. All the way through to natural death, where as you said, the end of life and euthanasia is there. So that's the entire culture of death in between there. And a mentality that we have is we can control that.
Yes.
Because science says we can do that. And we have a thing called the pill that tells us we can do that in a lot of cases. And so it empowers us to have control over our own bodies. And that leads us to a false sense of being God.
Alan, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's exactly the case. That's exactly the point. And if we go back really to Satan's fall, we can see where it originates. Satan's fall was this demand of being in control. He, through his pride, as the tradition goes, he refused to serve, non serviam, based on what it was that he was shown that he was to do. He refused to carry out his mission as an angel, as his nature. He wanted to be in control. He wanted to do it on his own terms. And he gained from that, if you will, an autonomy that he wanted. But the autonomy that he ended up gaining was eternal death, eternal separation from God. This is what the book of Revelation, interestingly enough, refers to, since we've brought that up, this cosmic battle, as the second death. The second death, Revelation refers to that 4 times. The second death is the death that Adam and Eve inherited for us.
Right.
This now becomes our natural end, if you will, without the divine intervention of the incarnation, the offering of salvation. And so Satan brings this upon us. Satan wants eternal death for all of us. He wants it not just, though, to experience the second death. He wants the first death to be the entree, if you will, our bodily death, to be the entree to our eternal death. And this was his temptation. If we go back to the temptation and we see, what was the temptation in Genesis, the first chapter of Genesis?
That Adam and Eve could be like God, and Satan told her, if you eat the fruit, you will be like God.
And you will not die.
Right.
But, of course, he recognized that they would, in fact, die. And death now becomes this underlying theme, if you will, of our culture. It's remarkable how closely tied death ends up becoming. We're starting to demand death not just of the capacity for conception, the capacity for this act, the marital act, which is supposed to be an act of total self-giving, life-giving love. We want to kill the life-giving aspect of it. When that capacity to make sure that it doesn't happen fails, we want to kill the fruits of that.
Right.
When life becomes unbearable for whatever reason, we demand the right to kill ourselves. We see that actually being fleshed out in philosophical thinking. This German philosopher at the end of the 19th century, who very aptly, Peter Kreeft, Dr. Peter Kreeft, who is a philosopher from Boston College, he refers to as Hell's favorite philosopher. This is none other than Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, yes.
Yes, Nietzsche basically, he was very bold, really, in the way that he allowed his thinking to go. And he came to the point in one of his, ultimately we could probably summarize his thinking as the will to power. Well, if we go back to what Satan and Adam and Eve wanted, they wanted to be God without God. Not that they weren't called to be gods, they were called to be God-like. Right. We're all called to become perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect, but not without God. The divinization that we were called to requires us to be conforming ourselves to the way that we were created. Now, when we say that, of course, I'll throw in that we're not talking about becoming uncreated, not to be worshipped in ourselves. But this is what actually ends up happening with Nietzsche. Nietzsche, when he was against God, he was an atheist, but an active atheist. He didn't see just God as somebody to be as a harmless superstition that we ought to get rid of. He saw God as the enemy that had to be killed off.
Wow.
Because of, as I said, the will to power. This is how we summarize his thinking. I have to be in control, and so much so that I can create my own reality. How does this tie in with death?
Sure.
Well, in one of his works, actually entitled Beyond Good and Evil, he makes the remark. It's in a chapter where he just is making a series of remarks. But one of those is that he says that his only solace, really, that allows him to get through these sleepless nights, is the capacity for suicide. This capacity to end it all.
Wow.
And so here we have very much tied this culture of death. But how is this, in fact, related to contraception?
Sure. So we get this culture of death here. We're talking physical death, of course, from conception, the beginning of life, to euthanasia at the end of life. So that's physical death. But all of the thought process and everything, of course, leads us to, as you said, our second death, spiritual death, which is much more damning and much more. And really what we want to focus on is we need to have people understand the state of their souls when they have this, what you call the contraceptive mentality. Not what you call, is what it is, what John Paul II called and wrote a lot in his theology body of it. But now as the contraceptive mentality, as we see that in our society and we see that we are empowered, well, how does that work out toward abortion? Where does that lead to abortion? How does that work?
Yes, John Paul II in Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, actually describes this distinction between the two. Now, they're both inherent evils.
Right.
They both are evils in and of themselves. It never can be done, both contraception and abortion. But they are different types of evil and different levels of gravity. Both are mortal sins, but of course actively killing versus trying to prevent a conception from taking place are different levels of evil, if we want to count, if you will.
Right.
So there is this difference, but really he says that they're fruits of the same tree. The fruits of the same tree really are, in fact, with terms of contraception, it's, as we said before, this desire to, this rejection of responsibility, rejection of the responsibility for what the marital act means and the consequences of that, and therefore this willingness within the marital act to demean it, if you will, to distort its meaning with regard to life-giving love. Now, there is in fact a much closer relationship which he intimates that we can point out. And this is really the fact that in most contraceptives, in the most contraceptive types called the pill or the shot, if you will, Depo-Provera, also some mechanical like the IUD.
Right.
If they don't, in their first mode of operation, which is in fact probably more appropriately called contraceptive, because what they do is they try to, well, they all act a little bit differently.
Barriers to try to stop that, right?
Yeah,
Contraception.
in a certain way, the pill, for example, tries to fool the body into thinking that it's always pregnant, so it
Right.
never ovulates, though we'll talk about how successful that is a little bit later.
Sure.
They all act a little bit differently, but in fact, they're not always successful. They're not always successful, and so the second mode of operation, if you will, is actually what is referred to as an abortifacient.
Okay.
In other words, they keep a fertilized egg, which would be at that particular time, be it when it travels down the fallopian tube,
Right.
a few days to a week after conception. The blastocyst is called, will migrate and will try to implant itself in the uterine wall. And it basically prevents this implantation. And so the child is not able to implant, and therefore it starves and dies.
It stars and dies through. So at the moment of conception, though, that's when, in the Catholic Church teaches, and has always taught that for 2,000 years, that at that moment of conception is when God creates the soul. And it is a human being that needs a respect for life and should be allowed to live.
Right.
And at this point, we are not allowing it to live by not allowing it to contact with the uterine wall in order to grow.
Right. Yes. Yes. Not to get too precise, the Church doesn't specifically say at the time that the human soul is entold. It sets that argument aside, but it basically points out that at the time of conception, you have a human being.
Right. Like
You have human life. You have a human person, if you will. That it's not an, I don't know, a turnip.
Right.
It's not, it's not a potential life, it's a human life. It's a distinct human life. And so therefore, at that point, it has all of the precursors, everything that's necessary to be a human, an adult human person. So it is a human being.
Sure, sure. As we continue on here with a little contraception, I want to back up a little bit on abortion and go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So if you think of, okay, where can I look and what the Church teaches on abortion? Well, where would you think you would look? You would look in the section under the 10 Commandments, under commandment number 5, thou shalt not kill. And specifically, that is chapters 2270 to 2275. So 2270 to 2275, you have your catechisms, open that up. And I'm in 2271, is that since the first century, the Church has affirmed the moral evil of every procured abortion. And 2272, formal cooperation in an abortion constitutes a grave offense. And whenever you say grave, and basically the words that we use now is an intrinsic evil. That in all cases, now I know there's many pro-life or people that call themselves pro-life that think, well, because of rape or incest, abortion could be okay in that case. That's not what the Church teaches. That's not what God says. That every conception, no matter how it is, that child deserves the right to life.
Yes, that's exactly right, Alan. Most of the arguments with regard to contraception as well as to abortion usually are very emotional arguments, and it looks at the difficulty, usually at the difficult cases. But as the old saying goes, legislating by the difficult cases makes for bad law.
Right.
It very much does. But it's also the case that a good end, it can never justify an evil means.
Evil means, there you go.
Evil, you can't do evil, the good may come from it.
Sure.
And this is a principle that we have to keep in the forefronts of our minds, because there are always very good ends, very compelling ends that we're drawn to, but they can never be justified. For example, say that and this is what we're coming to these days.
Sure. We'll talk our culture here in a little bit as we get, and we want you to join us here on Catholicism Live. This is a live show. We'll take your call-ins, ask your questions, give your comments. 210-734-5371. That's 734-5371. Please call in, and if you can't get a chance to call, please email us at live@catholic.org. Live, L-I-V-E, at catholic.org. And we got to take a break, Dr. Delaney, but we'll come right back and we'll take your calls, or we'll continue to discuss here the contraceptive mentality of the culture of death. It's Catholicism Live. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Bells, President, Chief Executive Officer of Catholic Life Insurance. And on behalf of Catholic Life Insurance, it is my great pleasure to welcome you, Archbishop Gustavo, to the Archdiocese of San Antonio. Our mission at Catholic Life Insurance over the last 110 years has been to help Catholic families achieve financial security. And we want you to know that we're here to support your mission. We look forward to working closely with you in the years to come. Best wishes. Bienvenido a San Antonio.
During the Christmas season, CTSA will be broadcasting several EWTN Masses. The dates and times are as follows. Friday, December 24th, 7 a.m. Daily Mass Live, 11 a.m. Daily Mass Encore, 3 p.m. Solemn Mass of Christmas Eve with Pope Benedict XVI live, 6 p.m. Daily Mass Encore, 9:30 p.m. Solemn Mass of Christmas Eve from the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception live. Saturday, December 25th, 12 a.m. Solemn Mass of Christmas from EWTN live, 7 a.m. Solemn Mass of Christmas Eve with Pope Benedict XVI Encore, 11 a.m. Solemn Mass of Christmas Day from the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception live, 5 p.m. Solemn Mass of Christmas Eve with Pope Benedict XVI Encore, 11 p.m. Solemn Mass of Christmas from EWTN Encore. The staff at CTSA wishes all its viewers a blessed and holy Christmas season.
Welcome back. This is Catholicism Live, and we're here talking about John Paul II's Theology of the Body, specifically the culture of death. Dr. David Delaney is here, the academic dean at the Mexican American Catholic College. And if you've heard this episode or any of the other episodes we've had, Dr. Delaney, you're teaching Theology of the Body next semester at the Mexican American Catholic College, correct?
Yes, I am. We're offering it on Monday nights. You can take it for undergraduate, graduate credit, or you can just audit it. If you're interested in taking the class, I would encourage anyone to go to our website and to sign up.
Right. Get on the website. That's www.macc in San Antonio here, .org. So it's MACC, M-A-C-C-S-A, 6 letters, MACCSA.org. Or look up under the Mexican American Catholic College and give them a call for Dr. Delaney's Theology of the Body class Monday night starting next semester. And if you're getting a little bit of the taste of it here, imagine what it is like in the classroom, and you can ask questions later on. We're talking about the contraceptive mentality. We're talking about how we are duped by science and by the people that tells us we are in control. But wait a minute, what does the church have to do in my bedroom? What I do with my spouse in my bedroom, or how I regulate the number of kids we have, the church shouldn't be able to tell me that. I should have that freedom and that right. Isn't that right?
That's a very good question, Alan. It's one that's very common. Another one associated with it very much is also that the church is just being unrealistic as well with regard to what this is. From that perspective, it seems to be, but we fall under the assumption that we are just like animals, if you will, that we can't control our libidos, we can't control ourselves. Often this is more associated with men than women,
Right.
But it's a very convenient argument. You know, if you think about where that argument goes, then you would have to start looking at whether or not it should be compulsory for people to engage in sexual activity. The government should oversee that if it's something that we can't control, or if we try to avoid it, that we become damaged. It just doesn't hold together when you start thinking about it. And in fact, when you start peeling the onion layers back, you'll start to see not only is it's ironic that it's the other way around. Expecting artificial contraception to be legitimate, to be able to be effective, to be harmless at least, is the unreasonable expectation. And we can look at it from two particular perspectives. One is from the medical perspective, right, the biological perspective, and one is from the meaning of the human person, the anthropological perspective, which brings in, we can do it with or without divine revelation. We'll do it with, but let's look at them one after the other. Let's first look at it from the medical perspective. Well, let's just look at it from common sense. Right. Okay, so medicine, what is medicine supposed to be about? Medicine is supposed to be about looking at the particular, looking at maladies, the malfunctions, if you will, of the human body, the human condition, and trying to figure out what the source of that is and remedy it. There is a natural end to all of the processes in our body, to all the different functions in our body, and sometimes in our fallen world they go astray, and they need to be remedied.
So like, for instance, would be an aspirin for a headache, or, or some type of shot for a deep cut or something, or a wound, or salve or something to keep it a healing process more than anything.
Healing something that's broken.
Right.
Well, let's look at artificial contraception. Can that be considered medicine? Is a pill medicine? Well, it's exactly the opposite, isn't it? We're trying to take a well-functioning part of the human body, primarily a woman's fertility system, right, and break it, right, cause it not to work. Do we think that we can do that, that we can introduce excessive natural and usually artificial drugs to the body, and to try to trick it, to try to fool it, to try to get it to not work the way that it was intended?
It seems backwards, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. It seems the opposite of what medicine is supposed to be. And it's unrealistic to expect that you can do that without any ill side effects, any consequences.
Before we get into that, just one thing that hit me before as we were discussing, all we have to do is say the word, the pill. There are thousands of drugs out there. There are thousands of different pill forms and thousands of companies that make different pills. But all we need to say is the pill, and everybody knows what we're talking about. That's the mentality that we have been taught in our society as we've grown up. We know exactly what this is for and where it's at, and it's been around 50 years. 50 years is 1960, the FDA approved, and then in 1965 and beyond is when it was readily available. But all of a sudden this has grown with our culture, and so we must take steps to stop this. And one of the ways to stop this or to educate is the facts. What are the facts of taking this? And we're trying to stop this part. Every other part of our body, our blood system, our muscle system, our cardiovascular system, we're healthy, we're trying to improve, we're trying to run, we're trying to take stimulants to get going big. But what are we doing with our fertility system? We're trying to stop it, suppress it. And that creates problems. Statistics-wise, we've got some here. Dr. Delaney, let's enlighten us with that, please.
Okay. Yes, Alan. And there are a lot of statistics that are out there that make a very close association between these two from a number of different countries. Some statistics that we can cite, for example, if a woman uses artificial contraception, the pill, before she gives birth at any time, she increases by 40% her chance of having breast cancer.
Wow.
If she uses it for more than 4 years before giving birth to her first child, she increases it by 70%. The earlier that you take it, the earlier you start it, the greater the chance, the greater increases that you have in artificial or in breast cancer. But that's not the only problem. If you read on the package inserts of any artificial contraceptions that you have, you will see that blood clots, thrombosis, deep vein thrombosis, is one of the causes,
side effects,
potential side effects, which can lead to strokes, high blood pressure. It can lead to heart attacks. It also can lead to depression. These are all side effects that come from using the pill.
But it appears naturally, and I've talked to a few doctors, and even my own family, the ladies that go in, and earlier children, as soon as they think they have some problems with especially at puberty, oh, here's the pill, it'll take care of things. So even though there's many different problems, the pill becomes the catch-all for all of it, when in fact it could be doing irreparable long-term harm.
That's exactly right, Alan. And this goes back to what we talked about, which is this culture of death. Even though medicine, for the most part, in those situations, medicine is actually trying to get the system to be working again. What it is, but it looks at it from the perspective of controlling it. It looks like medicine. The problem with medicine is the problem with a lot of science. Instead of looking at the integrity of nature and understanding the integrity of nature, trying to understand what in nature is going wrong, it basically comes at it from the perspective of, I don't know, in some ways we can consider, taking a hammer to everything, but it's trying to control, trying to force the body to operate in a particular way that gets the results that they intend. Sometimes that's the only approach that we understand that works, but that is oftentimes, though, driven by this mentality. This is why a lot of people are trying to move to, well, there's a great movement in many ways to alternative medicines that really try to look at how the body itself works, and trying to trying to figure out what the problem is and solving it at the level of the problem, as opposed to masking over the problem, if you will.
Sure. So, when the couples do take the pill, and depending on where it goes, or individual woman, then of course when they stop, well, then they expect their fertility just to pick right up and be ready to have a child within the next couple of months. It should be just normal, natural, right? Is that the statistics showed? Does that happen?
No, Alan, it can take a year to 18 months in some women for fertility to return, for the body to learn again how to operate in the way that it is supposed to. But there are other problems associated with it that can lead to long-term fertility problems as well.
So it's not just that time. It could damage it for good and damage it long. Depo-Provera, this is one form of the pill. Is that what Depo-Provera is?
Well, in actuality, Depo-Provera is a long-acting progesterone.
Okay.
It sometimes is referred to as the shot.
Norplant. So we've got the pill and we've got the shot. Okay, I'm catching up to you here.
It is. The pill usually has two different components to it: estrogen and progestin.
Okay.
Depo-Provera or Norplant has just progestin. And so they have slightly different ways that they operate, slightly different ways that they act. But usually Depo-Provera is given as a shot into the muscle, or it's inserted as Norplant into these plastic tubes that are inserted under the skin.
Okay.
This progestin is, in some ways, they went to it because a lot of the problems associated with that we're seeing were associated with estrogen, and so they thought, well, let's if we reduce or eliminate the estrogen, maybe we'll get away from some of these problems. Well, they got away from some and introduced others, but still, we see with regard to Depo-Provera, for 2 years or more after the age of 25, we see a much greater increase, 190% increase in the chances of developing breast cancer. We also see it reducing a woman's bone density. It worsens her cholesterol. There's actually a 430% increase in the instances of cervical cancer in women.
Wow.
Who use Depo-Provera.
Wow. Yes. This is shocking. I mean, if you take a look at 430%, folks, that's not nothing to sneeze at. Now, that's taking this drug for a while, which a lot of ladies do.
Yeah, 4 years.
Without knowing the side effects or consequence, or not being educated about that.
Yes, and all of these things are referred to as acceptable risks. Acceptable risks. But one looks at these types of risks. If these types of risks existed in any other so-called medication, it would be pulled by the market. But it's our mentality, in fact, that is causing us to see fertility, a woman's fertility, is a greater danger than her life. You know, we have to be willing to accept, you know, these loss of women's life. I would be outraged. I am outraged
Sure.
by this for you know, the women that you love. Can you imagine that you know, that are taught by the doctors that take these without even, and many times they don't even, doctors themselves are just taught, well, you know, this is safe,
Acceptable and,
and
safe.
and they don't themselves even read the package inserts and see what the consequences are or look at the studies.
Is our church behind? Have we been kind of caught by surprise by this and what's going on? I mean, there's the church has been teaching, I know, for abortion for a long, long time, and we can read that, but this is something new. This is science. Has our church caught up? Has the church been teaching this at all?
Yeah, it's Alan. The church has taught this from the very beginning about the evils of the intrinsic evils of contraception. It is true, though, that in actual practice on the ground in many parishes throughout the world, that a little bit of history. In the 1950s, drug companies started testing this, developing and testing this, called the Serum Corporation. They actually started testing what's referred to as a high-dose pill in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
To help, the reason they did that was that they weren't sure exactly what it was they would find, and they wanted to reduce their their chances of litigation, and they did. They end up having to adjust the levels of estrogen continually downward. Because they were seeing too high mortality rates.
Wow.
So this was live human experimentation that got them the pill. By 1960, they got it to a point that they were ready to present it to the FDA. Well, actually, by 1960, the FDA approved it. It wasn't until 1965, though, that it became generally available, because there was the Supreme Court overthrew what was referred to as the Comstock laws, which prevented the marketing, if you will, or the transportation across state lines of of artificial contraception.
Wow.
Right, and so we start seeing greater and increases in this. Because of this, and there was movement, actually, Dr. John Rock, he was a Catholic, he was said to be a very faithful Catholic, except on this issue. And he made a very strong appeal. He was in fact, involved in some of this very early testing. Appeal for artificial contraception as being illicit. The church, and he tried to make an argument that it operated within a woman's natural body cycles, even though we were artificially inducing those. And we all know the story from that. There was great expectation that the church was going to, after the Second Vatican Council, rule that this was illicit. And there were many Catholic moral theologians that were saying this. And priests were hearing this, and they were starting to advise their flocks that in certain cases, which became any case, it became okay. When Humanae Vitae came out in 1968, it shocked a lot of people, and there was a lot of rebellion. And because of this first great rebellion against church teaching, there's been a lot of confusion, and frankly, even many priests who believe what the church teaches from that time up to now are very hesitant to preach this or to teach it because of the great resistance, not just this hostility that they get from the average Catholic because of it.
Because of the mentality we already have. And who are you, Father, to tell me how to do my body? Here we're back to what we said before. We are playing our own gods. Huh?
Exactly. But if you look at the church's teaching from the 1930s, when the first Christian denomination, if you will, gave the first crack in the lining of, up to that time, every Christian group, tradition called it an evil.
Right.
In 1930, the Lambeth Conference, the Anglican Communion allowed it in just limited instances, like a crack in the windshield.
Sure.
Soon it was completely broken open, and there were no limitations.
Wow, and we're going to dig in a little bit more in this, Dr. Delaney. Thank you. Didn't mean to catch in there. We want to know about Humanae Vitae and what a prophet Pope Paul VI really was as we look back on this. But we need to take a break. This is Catholicism Live. We're talking about the culture of death. Don't touch that dial. Call your friends to call in at 210-734 888-281-5371, or you call in with your question or comment. Catholicism Live will be right back after this break. Thank you.
There's a way of life where simplicity brings joy and humility leads to happiness, where we learn that less is more, and in giving, we receive. It's our refuge from chaos and light to guide us through darkness. It's a place where the broken receive healing and repentant hearts find mercy. Here, our days are set free from anxiety and addictions, and our nights rest with more peace. So, where is this hope, and who knows the way? Our hope rests in Jesus, and His church leads the way. If you're longing to fill an emptiness or seeking a way home, we invite you to experience the peace that only comes from God. We are Catholic. Welcome home.
The popular Mariachi Mass, long a great attraction at Mission San Jose, has moved to Mission Concepcion. Mariachi Mexica and Mariachi Atzlan will be playing alternate Sundays. The men's acts community from St. Cecilia's and Mission Concepcion will serve the ministries. Donations and collections received will be used to defray the costs of the mariachis and will go to Mission San Jose to assist the parish during the closure of the church as it undergoes renovations.
When you find out you're pregnant, it can be a real surprise.
After all, you weren't planning on this. So now you're feeling kind of confused, scared, and just don't know what to do or who to turn to.
Here's the good news. There is help. If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, you don't have to feel alone.
There's a nearby women's center that can help you completely, confidentially, and give you free advice.
If you think you're pregnant, there is help. Call now or go online today.
Welcome back. This is Catholicism Live. We're talking theology of the body from Pope John Paul II and on the culture of death. But before we get to that, we want to thank Deacon Tom and Mary Jane Fox from the Pilgrim Center of Hope for allowing us to be here to cover this subject. And we want to tell you that there's a women's luncheon coming up Saturday, January 29th at the old San Francisco Steakhouse. Amber Pilkington will be talking on women, food, and Christ, seeing the dignity and beauty of your body. Women, this is one you can from an expert that will tell you about the background that she has. Men, if you haven't gotten your Christmas present yet for your significant other, your spouse, or your significant lady, please go to the Pilgrim Center of Hope website. That's pilgrimcenterofhope, one word, .org, and sign up and get a ticket. Get a ticket for your significant other, your lady, for the Catholic Women's Luncheon on Saturday, January 29th. It'll be from 11:30 to 1 p.m. and hear Amber Pilkington. Back to where we were at, we finished up with Humani Vitae in 1968. The church knew what was going on. The church wrote an encyclical on this, and it was not well received. Catholics were expecting the church to fold and to fall right in with the science and the freedom.
Yes, that's exactly what happened, Alan. And remarkably enough, John Paul II, at the time, Archbishop, or actually I think he was a cardinal by then, right. Karol Wojtyła, who would become John Paul II. He was actually helping. He was on the commission. He actually is believed to have had a hand in helping with Humani Vitae. Good. He was one of the great supporters of it, and he was very surprised at the response as well. And that actually was the genesis of his theology of the body discourses. He recognized that a lot more could and needed to be said about the human person. And he did. He wrote it in this. And if we go back to really what the human person is and made in the image of God, as we talked about in the first segment of this, we can see where he sees this tie, because there's something that's brought out in Humani Vitae that we can see within the tradition, but it wasn't articulated very, very completely. And he saw this as a reflection of the way in which the human being was made after the image and likeness of God. We know that God is love, and we talked about the Trinity and how the Trinity is total life-giving love, such that the Father gives himself to the Son receives and returns himself to the Father, and that is life-giving. It's a person. It's not a what, it's a who, as you tell us, which, it's a very profound thing to think about. In God, it is a person. Well, in human beings, this is really the same, the image of that. But we are made body and soul unity. This term hylomorphism that we talked about. And hylomorphism is what? That the body and the soul interpenetrate so much one another so much that when we see the body, we see the soul. The body is all throughout the soul. In fact, they're not made to exist apart. And there are two aspects of that. So traditionally, our soul more perfectly reflects God in His perfection because it gives us a capacity to love, the capacity for union, for communion with others. The body, though, does also reflect in a certain way our capacity to image God, the capacity for begetting, which St. Thomas saw in Theology of the Body brings about. And in fact, in procreation, it is our bodies that we participate in. God creates the soul immediately, but the father and the mother donate aspects of their bodies for the bodily constitution of their child. And so the two become one, become three. Well, the unity of this act that Humanae Vitae pointed out was the unity of the procreative and the unitive meaning, that they had to hold together. And interestingly, how those align very well with the hylomorphic nature of the human person. The procreative meaning, paralleling, if you will, actually arising from the bodily aspect, and the unitive meaning arising from the soul, the capacity to love, to give one another. Well, what happens if one separates the body from the soul? Well, it's death.
Right.
So what happens in this act of a body and soul if you try to separate the bodily aspect of that meaning of the act from the soul's aspect of the meaning of the act? Well, it no longer is the marital act. If you separate the two, the marital act dies, and it becomes an act essentially of fornication. And so this is what John Paul sees, and this is really what Humanae Vitae is pointing out, the fact that we're made after the image of God, that we imitate His perfection, that the act in its object, in what it looks like, has to be open to, even if it doesn't result in life. It has to, you can't change the form of it without destroying the meaning of the act.
So the marital act of a husband and wife and the act of marriage is a life-giving and love-giving creative together. And if you block the life-giving, i.e. a contraceptive, from any of the means we talked about, or if you break the love-giving, then you lose the entire spot there. Although in rape and incest and thing, maybe the love's not there, however, that still does create. And as we go into Christmas here and think Jesus Christ being born of Mary on Christmas Day, He was conceived by the Holy Spirit and lived all parts of life, so that life is sacred there. Then the church just tells us, well, if we have to have this love and this life, well, then we're supposed to have as many children as possible and just leave it all up to God, right? Does the church just tell us all that? We don't have to worry about it?
Well, that church doesn't actually say that.
Okay, good.
Humanae Vitae points out this phrase called responsible parenthood.
Yes.
Responsible parenthood doesn't mean that you're supposed to have as many children as you possibly can, but it's supposed to be very prayerfully done.
Right.
One has to be open to God's gifts of children, and that's what children are, God's gifts to us. And one has to be very self-giving in that, and not fear that there won't be enough. There always is enough. And so for serious reasons, one is allowed to space children within marriage by using recourse to natural methods, understanding the way that the body works, and refraining from the marital act during periods of fertility. Notice that this is, sometimes people refer to this as Catholic contraception. Well, it's not, maybe in some ways somebody can fall into that mentality. But really, if you're trying to be in accord with church teaching and use natural family planning, what you're doing is you're not changing the form of the act. You're using what God has naturally put there, along with your intellect, to be able to refrain from, and you don't have to, just like you don't have to have children all the time, you don't have to express the marital act all of the time.
Sure, it's called chastity within marriage, and there is a natural cycle of the woman of fertility and non-fertility, and there's a lot to be learned here and a lot to be taught here, and we need to give some resources out to make sure that we do know that. Of course, our Archdiocese website, archsa.org, has, and Family and Life has some information there. Human Life International, www.hli.org is a good source on the web. Another is ALL, and ALL stands for?
American Life League.
American Life League, www.all.org. And of course, Priests for Life. Make that all one word, Priests for Life. Father Frank Pavone has a book out, and many other books here. One of his called Ending Abortion. And Father Frank Pavone, under Priests for Life, will give you a lot of information there on natural family planning, but also on the evils of abortion and the statistics and evils of contraception and other things that go on there. But it's my conscience. Can I just follow my conscience? Oh, wait a minute, you're giving me all this information, but my conscience should be my guide in what I do. Isn't that the way it should work, Dr. Delaney?
That's a very good question. It is true, Alan, that we must follow our consciences, but we have to first define what a conscience is.
Ah, good.
First of all, a conscience is not a feeling.
Ah, okay.
Although feelings can arise from it when you ignore it or you disobey it, but it's not first a feeling, it's not an opinion, and it's not your own source of morality. What it is it's a three-part act. First, it's an awareness of moral norms, of absolute what's right and what's wrong. Then it is taking those general norms, what's right and what's wrong, and applying it to a concrete instance.
Right.
Is this norm, how does this norm fit this particular circumstance? Once making that fitment of that, if you will, then it makes a moral judgment. Is this action in accord with the moral norm, or is it not in accord with the moral norm? Notice there is no way, it's an awareness of absolute moral norms and not a giving of moral norms. This is why it's not a direct connection to God in that regard.
Okay.
And so this is why the church teaches that it has to be a well-formed conscience.
Right.
The church is what teaches us to help us to form our consciences. What is right and wrong in these particular circumstances?
So the contraceptive mentality doesn't take these norms into account as well, or doesn't want to study these norms and said, well, it's my body, I make this choice and I do what's going on, and I don't think the church can teach me and tell me, so you have that barrier. So what we need to do is turn around to try to teach that, and that's what we've been trying to do here, is to give you the medical reasons and the psychological reasons and the other reasons that we need to learn what the church teaches us, because the church teaches us for our own good.
It
for
does.
our bodily good, and more important, for our soul's good.
It does.
Our soul's good.
It does, Alan. And in this particular circumstance, what is the absolute moral norm? Well, it's the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. And we already talked about the fact that we know from science, if you go to any book on embryology, you know that at conception, you have a unique human being.
Right.
The DNA now is formed. The scientists will say it has all the epigenetic primordia, if you will. It's a fancy term to say it has everything that it needs to develop into a full human, an adult human being. And so therefore it is a unique human being. It's not the mother, it's not the father. It's its own being. And to play with words, to say, well, it's a human being but not a human person, those are just word games.
Right, right. We need to take the value of what it is and where it's at and go to these websites and learn more. Catholic.org, www.catholic.org, or get on EWTN.com, has a lot of information on that. And wow, what an action-packed time we've had here, Dr. Delaney. Thank you. We do need to cover our saint of the day. Saint of the day is St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, who was the first United States citizen to be canonized as saint. So something here in the United States, St. Cabrini. She was born in 1850 in Italy and then came over to the United States at the interest of her archbishop to come to the United States. She founded 67 institutions dedicated to the poor, the abandoned, the uneducated, and the sick. In 35 years, 67 different institutions. And something we talked about, fear. Fear drives us a lot into there. She had a fear for drowning, and so she had a fear of water. However, she traveled across the Atlantic Ocean more than 30 times. Talk about overcoming a fear, a natural fear. We have a fear of having too many children. We have a fear of having this. So this is a lady can tell us we can overcome that fear. She died in December 22nd, today, her feast day in 1917, and died in a Columbus hospital in Chicago, part of what she founded. Mother Cabrini is the patron saint of hospital administrators, of immigrants, and what I can relate to, impossible causes. So this is, thank you, Mother Frances Cabrini, as being a saint United States citizen, overcoming fear and the fear of the sin that gives us. The Pearl of the Week. Dr. Delaney, you picked the Pearl of the Week, the Architects of the Culture of Life. You've read that book, I'm sure. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, or the Architects of the Culture of Death.
I'm sorry, Culture of Death.
Right.
Yeah, I said it wrong.
I
Sorry.
believe that this Donald DeMarco and Benjamin Wicker, they actually, I go through, I believe there are 5. One of them who we talked about tonight, Friedrich Nietzsche.
Right.
What these are generally philosophers, and sometimes we think, well, what do philosophers really have to say? But it turns out that what happens today in the ivory towers of academia and philosophical thought, for some reason, it will make its way into common thinking within the next generation. And this is basically not all philosophers, but many of them are philosophers. This is how this disordered thinking has made its way into our thinking, and it's important to do that.
And we've got to be very careful of the contraceptive mentality and the other things we've talked about. Thank you again, Dr. Delaney, for all of your education and things that you've had and shared with us. Thank you, Deacon Tom and Mary Jane Fox from the Pilgrim Center of Hope. Please check out their website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. And if we've spurred some questions, email us live, Live, at catholic.org. This is Catholicism Live. Dr. Delaney, thank you again for your time here. We've had a wonderful time. Everyone have a very blessed Christmas and a holy New Year. God bless you. Thank you.
In Texas, sausage making is a time-honored craft. That's why we don't add monosodium glutamate, phosphates, and other hard-to-pronounce ingredients into our sausage. Hi, I'm Mike Kilbasa. Read our label and you'll understand why we're the best in the business.